Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerSToo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really helps us out. It's a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
Going very well, Mark. How are you getting on yourself?
Not bad, feeling a lot less ill this week, which is great.
Oh, that's good, yeah. You were sounding awful groggy by the end of the show.
Yeah, pretty nasally, felt pretty ill. Got the podcast out though, which I'm pretty pleased about.
Well done. A trooper. No complaints at all.
Yeah, definitely didn't complain once about that. Anyway, Lewis, what have you been playing this week?
This week, Mark, I actually made a start on A Plague Tale: Innocence, the first game in the now Plague Tale series, I suppose. And a quick shout out to regular listener Janie Seymour, a good friend of mine, who texted me after last week's show to tell me to get on with playing this game because the new one was coming out. So I have jumped into it. I've played, I don't know, I think I'm just below halfway through the game now, like just shy of halfway from a couple of PlayStations. I gather it's not too long. I've kind of been rattling through it fairly quickly in the short couple of playthroughs I've had so far. It's good. I'm enjoying it. It doesn't feel radical or revolutionary particularly. Like there's a thing about
it feels like an old school game, right?
It does feel like an old school game.
Yeah,
one thing I really like about it in that sense is that it's just pretty linear and it's very clear about what it wants you to do most of the time. So it's just kind of a case of moving forward and solving the sort of environmental or stealth puzzles that you've got in front of you. Honestly, what it really reminds me of is sort of the stealth sections of the original Last of Us on PS3 kind of clipped out, fleshed up a wee bit and set in a different time period.
I totally get that, man.
Yeah,
I totally get that. Yeah.
You know, that might sound a wee bit critical, but I don't mean it to be at all. Like that gameplay loop is good fun and it can be challenging and it can be stressful. There's a few things about this, like the enemy AI I found a bit laughable at times, you know, and also frustrating.
They're a small studio.
Exactly, and again, I'm not saying any of that to be critical. You know, there's
vision cones of some of the enemies are odd.
I mean, there's kind of solutions to some of those puzzles where you're like creeping about 3 inches behind a soldier who's like on patrol and you know, stealth gameplay is stealth gameplay. It's always going to be a bit like that, but there's times where, you know, people should definitely see you in the grass or whatever it is. That's, you know, it's just the classic stealth mechanics thing. So I mean, for anyone who's enjoyed games like that, or sections of games like that, you'll enjoy this. It's got it's pretty tight in terms of the stealth gameplay. Really, it's not very complex, and it's been introducing little adaptations to that in terms of, you know, your inventory and the kind of projectiles you have and that kind of thing. Getting introduced to Amicia's lethal slingshot headshots was pretty good fun in the early doors. The story-wise, like I'm kind of getting to discover bits and pieces of the mystery of like why the Inquisition is after Hugo, the lead character's little terribly annoying brother. Oh my god! I mean, if the rats don't get that boy,
I've got bad news for you. I don't know if you've seen any trailers for the sequel, mate, but
I mean, I'm hoping he turns it around. Yeah. And just one, like, there was one sequence that I found quite... In fact, well, a couple of sequences that have been quite affecting, for good and bad, I suppose. There's a section where, I'm not counting this as a spoiler, where you need to solve a puzzle, essentially by setting the rats onto a pig that is alive, and there's kind of no reason that had to be there. I mean, I know why it had to be there, and obviously the game is trying to suggest the brutality of sort of medieval French life during...
Lewis, is this your vegetarian side coming out here?
I mean, it is a wee bit...
We very rarely get vegetarian Lewis on the podcast.
Genuinely found that a bit kind of too much when I was watching. I mean, I knew exactly what was going to happen, obviously, from the first minute. Literally, as the rats were devouring it, I was thinking, couldn't we at least have killed the pig? Like, they were been eating carcasses the whole time. Like, we could have at least given it a slightly nicer death than that. I'm not even saying that it's like immersion.
I mean, it was grim. I'm not going to
lie,
and it was like made out to be a grim moment.
Totally.
And the wee boy sort of turns on you at that moment as
well.
He
freaks out.
It was supposed to be
and...
bad, to be clear.
Totally. And you know, and I guess
this isn't just being a sensitive vegetarian.
It's there to make you have that feeling. feeling. And there's a similar moment a wee bit later on where there's a guy, like a human, who is sort of trapped at one end of a corridor, but your movement towards him pushes all the rats towards him, and he doesn't have a light source. And that I mean, that's quite clever how that's done, and I think there is actually a trophy achievement if you don't have him be killed by kind of using the tools that you've got, but it doesn't really prompt you to think like that, and it just sort of happens as you're playing it. And that, you know, that really was affecting, because you're kind of, it does make you aware of the consequences of your own survival in this world. Can be pretty devastating for other people, but so enjoying it. I think as I'm speaking about it, I'm realizing I enjoyed it and thought about it a bit more than I had while I was playing it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the back half. Like, I'm assuming it's kind of this for the rest of the duration, which is fine, really. Some more complex puzzles and stuff.
To be honest with you, there's probably a lot less moments like that as it goes on. There's a lot less of that like extreme brutality of the world, you know what I mean? And we start to get more into the Inquisition and what's happening with them sort of thing, you know? You're probably over the worst of it. I'll put it that way.
Okay, cool. I mean, the rats are a good laugh anyway, so I'm enjoying that.
Yeah, they are. Well, Lewis, I'm just going to jump in here to say that I have actually been playing the sequel, A Plague Tale Requiem, which came out not that long ago at all. I have had a very busy week, Lewis, and I have barely scratched the surface. I've honestly played a couple of hours, just the little beginning part of the game, basically. Honestly, it feels like more of the same, like it's evolution and not revolution, and I don't think that this game needed that. Do you know what I mean? I don't think it had to be reinventing the wheel in any capacity. I think that it looks great. I think that it looks like visually very stunning. I'm 100% here for it, I've got to say. I'm very much looking forward to getting stuck into this game a bit more and having a bit more time to do that this week, hopefully. But yeah, I don't have too much to add, and I'm going to hold my thoughts back until next week until I have a bit more substance behind them, you know. But immediate first thoughts are positive, I will say that much.
Well, that's good. I mean, from all the reviews, it seemed like that sort of more of the same was quite likely to be the case. But as long as it does feel like it has evolved in some way, or is it, you know, a bit bigger or a bit more sort of interesting, I'm really keen to see how, you know, your experience of playing the sequel while I'm playing this first game. I might well go straight into the sequel, or pretty soon go into the sequel if it's.
I think you should, man. That'd be a good way to play them.
I mean, if I enjoy the rest of this as much as I have the first part, I might well do that. It also may well depend how quickly I can get to it before God of War drops, obviously. But,
of course. Just round the corner now.
Yeah, so always at the back of your mind now, like, but how much time is there until God of War? But no, I think, the two games together, you know, it should be interesting to see how that studio's evolved that idea in the few years. And I think probably on the back of what was quite a surprising success with the first game. I mean, it sort of was a sleeper hit. It wasn't marketed as a big deal game, but it was really well received. So maybe they've kind of been able to flex some muscle on the sequel a bit. So keen to see what you think next week.
Yeah, definitely. I hope to see that. I hope that they have been brave with what they're doing, I suppose, and maybe tried to open up the scope a little bit. Not that it has to be of a big scope, you know what I mean? I think that keeping it tight and to the point of what these two kids are doing and how they're surviving in their world and that story is fine, but yeah, I don't know, just maybe get a bit more dynamic with those stealth sections or something like that, do you know what I mean? Maybe make them feel a bit less last generation and a bit more this generation, you know?
Totally.
I'd be there for that a lot. I think that these games are sleeper hits, to be honest with you, and they do have a bit of a cult following now, and the minute you play them, you see why, because it does harken back to, particularly if people are our age, I guess, less of like a simpler time in video games, you know what I mean? And it's just a really pleasant playing experience, despite the fact that what's actually going on in front of you is often quite times terrible, as you rightly pointed out. All right, Liz, I think it's time for the news. Alright, loose news item number 1. There has been fresh claims by developers that the Series S has hamstrung this generation of consoles list. This all actually spun out from the conversations around Gotham Knights when it was announced that that game would only be running at 30 FPS. Then Lee DeVonald, a senior character technical artist for Rocksteady, said in a tweet, "I wish gamers understood what 60 FPS means in terms of all of the things they are losing to make a game run that fast, especially taking into account that we have a current gen console that is not much better than the last gen ones," referring to the Series S, obviously. He then went on to claim that the Series S was a hardware bottleneck and that multi-platform games, quote, have to optimize for the lowest platform, meaning, again, the Series S, and claiming that an entire generation of games is being hamstrung by, quotes, that potato, again, referring to the Series S. Devonald has subsequently deleted his Twitter account because of the backlash to this. Then responding to a comment by Jeff Gersman saying that the Series S argument didn't hold up because multi-platform games also have to release on PC and cover a wide variety of hardware, VFX artist Ian McClure said this, Luce.
It might sound broken, but the reason you're hearing it a lot right now is because many developers have been sitting in meetings for the past year desperately trying to get Series S launch requirements dropped. Studios have been through one development cycle where Series S turned out to be an albatross around the neck of production, and now that games are firmly being developed with new consoles in mind, teams do not want to repeat the process.
McClure's tweets have now also been made private because of the backlash to that. This also isn't the first time this sort of thing has been brought up recently. Digital Foundry's Alexander Battaglia also said in May that the Series S's constraints were quote-unquote a pain to work with. Granted that in June apparently Xbox made more memory available in the Series S somehow, but obviously it's nowhere near what the PS5 or the Series X have. Now, firstly, just to nip this in the bud immediately, the Series S is going absolutely nowhere. It is sold incredibly well for Xbox and has outsold the Series X in several key markets for them, including Japan, I believe. And because it has sold so well, I highly doubt that Xbox would go back on their requirement for developers to release games on the Series S and the Series X, because that would effectively be a betrayal to the people who bought that console in good faith, expecting that all games this generation would come to that console. But I have to say, to people that are claiming that developers having to constantly consider the lower specs of the Series S won't affect game development, won't hold things back to a certain extent, my response to that, I suppose, would, how can it not be? How can it not be holding things back? Because by that logic, if it was just a matter of, I don't know, toning down frame rates and making models look less good or whatever, like, there'd be no reason that you couldn't play the new God of War on the PS3 or play the newest Halo on the 360. I mean, surely to anyone that sounds nonsense, because technology becomes obsolete. It's just a thing that happens over time. People move on, different processes come into place to make things operate better, and that goes along with the technology that you're working with. This conversation often boils down to, I think anyway, frame rates and resolutions and VRR support and all that and blah, 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 blah. And the Series S has proven itself to be able to run AAA games at 1440p at 60 frames per second. And absolutely fair enough, that is great. Will probably be good enough for most people, but like, is that all we're really looking for this generation? Like, is higher frame rates and better resolutions the best that we can do here? Because to me, that doesn't make a game very good or very interesting, to be honest with you. It might make a good game better, but it's not going to make a bad game good. Do you know what I mean? What excited me was when Mark Cerny was talking about the PS5, and the same could definitely be applied to the Series X when I'm talking here. But he wasn't talking about the next generation being good for frame rates and being good for resolutions and all that, although it is. He was talking about how the power of these new consoles and the SSDs and everything that goes along with that could literally change how games are being made, and that we could be doing things differently, and that we could be achieving things on this new hardware that we couldn't previously be achieving on previous hardware. And as the developers here rightly point out, I think, the Series S isn't that much better than a PS4 Pro or an Xbox One X. Do you know what I mean? It's just not. And as things continue to move forward, and we do get games that are being made exclusively for next-gen consoles, because the tail of the last generation has been so long, we're not really seeing a lot of that yet. But I truly believe that in 2 years' time from now, I think that this problem will be more and more emphasised. Despite the fact that it's not a problem now, I think that no matter which way you cut it, as developers try and push these consoles, meaning the PS5 and the Series X, they will simply be able to do things due to their capabilities that the Series S simply won't be able to keep up with, just due to its hardware limitations. And on top of that, it sounds like it's just frustrating that the developers now have a third console effectively to have to deal with. It's not just the PlayStation and the Xbox. It's the PlayStation, the Series X and the Series S all have to be considered. And I can't remember, was it E. McClure who said about the albatross around the neck? I mean, I think that developers will just feel that this entire generation, you know?
Yeah, potentially, yeah. I think the key thing to me in all this is the time component to it all. I don't really think that this is an issue right now, and obviously I don't know enough about development to say that these devs who are saying this are incorrect or whatever, or that these problems aren't coming down the line. You're right, like technology does become obsolete, but at the same time, where we stand at the moment, plenty of good games are coming out on the previous gen consoles and are, you know, working fine on Series S. And by the same token, games that are kind of focused on being next gen experiences are not really hitting the mark, and I don't think that can always be blamed on the Series S. You know, I don't really buy into any comparisons between the state of Gotham Knights and the Series S being the problem, and I'm not saying that anyone is necessarily suggesting that, but it's kind of...
to be honest with you, I think that's a pretty disingenuous reading of what that guy was saying in that moment as well. But
yeah.
No, I don't think that the Series S is responsible for Gotham Knights being a bad game, frankly, and running at 30 FPS.
That's the thing, yeah. So at the moment, we're not seeing, in terms of what's on the market right now, we're not really seeing this impact. But absolutely, down the line, we may well do. And by the same logic, we will eventually phase out of the two previous gen consoles, you know, properly, as much as we're stepping away from that at the moment. But I don't know. I think that there are arguments that stack up in the favour of something like the Series S that may well be holding things back a wee bit, or might be forcing devs to have to put in a bit of work into kind of a bit more optimization than they would otherwise have had to. But I think essentially, you know, if you look at Xbox here, they have made the decision that nothing that was coming technologically would make them more money, presumably by impressing people with all the new power and ability of the new hardware. Nothing about that was going to make them more money than selling a cheaper console to more people, and particularly with Xbox's strategy of getting people into the ecosystem, right, and onto Game Pass. So, you know, you've got to assume Microsoft have done the sums here and kind of went, well, the great leap forward isn't necessarily here yet, and so it's not going to translate to cash money. Maybe 5 years from now, 2 years from now even, that will be more of an issue. But you can also imagine that they will by then relax some of the rules around that. You can also imagine, for example, that they will pivot the Series S to be a streaming box of some description, in the way that the Switch at the moment is just playing a lot of streamed games. You know, that could be how devs get around the requirement to be on the Series S. They could put their game forward for cloud gaming.
That's interesting, yeah.
So that's the thing. To me, you know, there's definitely technological and artistic arguments for scrapping it. And like you say, that's not going to happen, but you know, from moving away from it, essentially, there is this other thing about like how many people does that actually benefit, and like you say, it has sold really well. So I worry about that devs only are thinking about themselves and they're part of all of this when they make statements like that, and that's fair enough. This is their job. They're the creators behind all this. But if you're someone sort of reading those points being made or hearing them on other podcasts and thinking, well, I basically couldn't afford to be part of this, and then if that was the case, then that sucks as well, right? So I'm always leaping a wee bit to the defense of the Series S because I think it was a good idea for those kinds of reasons, but totally accept that in time it will not be performing well, much like, you know, the Switch is right now.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I think it probably sounds as if we're disagreeing quite a lot here, but actually I probably agree with quite a lot of what you said. Like, I actually don't think that this is a massive issue right now. Yeah. I think that for the next cycle of next gen games, exclusively next gen games, that's when we might start to see more devs say things like what we're hearing now, basically.
And that'll be really interesting if they do, definitely.
I'm expecting. However, I actually think that the strongest counter argument to this, because I was speaking just about, like, how do we get the best games out of these consoles, is not to bother with the Series S, basically, is what I was saying. Yeah. But, I mean, I actually think that the strongest counter argument to that is the economic argument, and that, well, is that worth it? Is it worth to have the greatest, best gaming experience when we can have 90% of that and far more people can afford to play it on the Series S? That is a very compelling counter argument, I've got to say. All right, Lewis, news item number 2. The story that keeps on giving, the CMA, who are investigating the Xbox and Activision deal, have asked the UK public to share their views on the deal. And I don't know if that's normal in these sorts of things, Lewis. I really don't. But that seems like an overwhelmingly bad idea. It just seems as if you're asking fanboys to send you hate mail, basically.
The UK public
you're just
over the
get
last
shouted at from both directions. Yeah.
The UK public has shown over the last few years it cannot be trusted either.
Well, I didn't say that. But the CMA are inviting the public to submit their views and evidence regarding what the CMA are calling the issues of harm, which Lewis is about to read for you now.
The impact of the merger on other console gaming platforms, including Activision games being made Xbox exclusives, Activision games being made timed Xbox exclusives, Microsoft making Activision games lower quality on other systems, such as missing features, Microsoft making Activision games more expensive on other systems, the impact of the merger on multi-game subscriptions that rival Game Pass, the impact of the merger on the future of cloud gaming. All the big hits there.
All the big hits. Apparently, after analysing all of this evidence, the CMA will provide their findings in January, at which point they will then invite the public to share their views again for some reason. So I think this process is a long way off from being over, and the EU have not really got involved yet. The FTC have not really got involved yet. The CMA are saying that they are aiming to publish their final report on March the 1st, so it's at least that far out. But Lewis, they also did say this.
If we find no competition concerns, the deal can go ahead as planned. If we do find competition concerns, we decide how these should be remedied. For example, this can include selling part of the business or prohibiting the merger altogether.
Selling part of the business, which is exactly what you were talking about last week, Lewis, when the CMA ordered Meta to sell Giphy. And I just have to add this because this was happening literally as I was writing the show notes out. Tom Warren over at The Verge was live tweeting a Phil Spencer speech at the Wall Street Journal's live tech event or whatever it was that was happening. Once again, he said that Call of Duty would be on PlayStation and said that he would even like to bring it to Switch. He also said, and this is new to me, I have to say, that they intend to treat Call of Duty like Minecraft, which remained on all platforms after Microsoft bought it. He also said that this deal was more about mobile for them. Still not sure how much I believe that, but the mobile aspect of this is a huge part of it, though. Like, I think that as quote-unquote hardcore gamers, a term which I fucking despise, we sort of overlook that, but that is where a huge amount of the money is here, you know what I mean? He did also say, just as a tidbit and a potential news item for next week, that they might have to raise the price of a few things going forward as well. So Xbox fans, I would look forward to £70 games very, very shortly, and the increase of the subscription services and of the Xbox. All probably in line with what PlayStation have already done and taken a huge ton of shit for, but we'll see if that comes to fruition, because he did say that with the holiday period coming up, he wouldn't be doing that yet. But Lewis, back onto the CMA stuff. It's the news item that keeps on giving, as I joked about. It just feels as though we'll be talking about this every week until the deal is finally pushed through.
Yeah, absolutely. There always seems to be one story like this that we cover week upon week for months on end. There's always some long saga going on in gaming.
Feels as though we've been talking about this for years.
Yeah, well, yeah. Of late, they've all been surrounding Xbox's acquisition strategy. But yeah, this is. I guess it's good to know kind of officially what the CMA could consider doing, and also what the kind of key issues that they're looking at here in terms of what would be problematic for this merger going ahead. I mean, we've said it countless times, like, I still expect all this to go through. I'm more intrigued now that there is a possibility of some aspect of the business being sold or kind of reshaped. As you were saying before, you know, maybe Call of Duty just becomes its own kind of company, and that could be a way of keeping it multi-platform as well, if what Phil Spencer seems to be saying. I think that's
the most likely outcome. That isn't just the deal going through, do you know? I mean, I still think that the most likely outcome is that this deal goes through with no restrictions, but the second most likely outcome is that they are forced to make Call of Duty its own business and effectively sell that part while acquiring the rest of Activision Blizzard and all the mobile stuff and all that, you know?
Which I guess, you know, if Phil Spencer's being genuine there, that things like the mobile component of Activision Blizzard King is, you know, if that is really why they're doing it, or one of the reasons that they're really doing it, then it shouldn't matter too much. Although I guess they would want their purchase price to come down quite a bit.
Well, I imagine they'd be getting quite a lot of money by selling Call of Duty, to be honest.
Well, that's true, yeah. If it actually is sold like that, yeah. I have no idea how these things would work in the end, if that would still be under some sort of Xbox control, or if it would just have to be removed altogether, or any of that. But I guess that's what the next 6 months of reporting is going to tell us, if not further than that into the future. Yeah, I mean, this is what happens when huge businesses try and do deals like this. And just one thing on that mobile point I wanted to say is that I guess, because I'm skeptical of that as well, as I think everyone is right to be, but they could have paid a lot less just to make Call of Duty exclusive, so they must have some other business interests in play here.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I do think that the mobile thing is an important part of this. Like, Xbox have not a massive mobile presence, and I think that is an area where they, as business people, will be looking to grow into, and this is a very quick way of doing it. Expensive, but quick way of doing it. All right, Lewis, news item number 3. Hideo Kojima has said some mad Hideo Kojima type things about his new game, Lewis, saying that his next game will be, quotes, almost like a new medium, not only for the games industry, but for the movie industry as well. He also added that the challenge for his next game is building the infrastructure, saying, you can have a successful experiment, but there's a long distance between an experiment and a place where it's something that becomes a part of everyday usage. It is believed that there are currently 2 games in development at Kojima Productions, the first being Death Stranding 2, apparently, and the second, and the game that we're likely talking about here, is the leaked Overdose game. We're very likely talking about the game that will be a cloud game that he is exclusively making for Xbox as well, which is a game that he said that he wanted to make for a while, but due to technological constraints couldn't. Also recently been announced that Elle Fanning will be in the next Kojima game, and that a second woman would also be in it, which is widely believed to be Margaret Qualley. Is that how we're saying that, Lewis?
Go for it.
Who was also in Death Stranding.
Yeah.
And was great in it, to be honest. Lewis, I'm going to say something here which I truly, desperately hope isn't true. But a lot of that language that he was saying, and the fact that this is a cloud game, sounded a little bit metaversey to me, which would be a very, very bad thing and would be catastrophically disappointing to me as a Kojima fan, to be totally honest. That being said, on the right side, I don't think that you get Hollywood actors to sign up for something like that if it's just like a dumb metaverse thing. So, yeah, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, more Kojima. This is one of the other stories that we're always doing, whatever Kojima has said
what next has Kojima said now?
Crazy games. Every game Kojima does these days seems to be some long-held, completely unrealisable vision that he's always had, you know. Again, here, this is the game that he's been dying to make forever, and it's going to change the medium, just like, you know, a Strand game supposedly was going to.
Yeah, remember that? That was weird.
I don't know what to make of any of this. I think you're right. This is almost certainly the Xbox game. It's the cloud thing. That's the only thing that ties up in terms of the various statements that he's made, and that could be metaversey. Yeah, I've heard weirder things than Hollywood actors jumping on the gravy train of sort of Web3 bullshit.
Well, that's true.
But I don't really. I kind of have more faith in Kojima and in Phil Spencer than that. I don't think Phil Spencer's going to want to come out with some metaverse NFT adjacent thing either, particularly if it is like their big flagship thing with Kojima. It's a huge moment for Xbox, really, and Kojima. And so I'm willing to think that it might not be that it might be something more like an ongoing multiplayer interactive story or something, you know, a bit like what we were talking about with Silent Hill, whichever one it was last week, with the behaviour involved in, and it's sort of
the Bandersnatch one.
Yeah, exactly, the Bandersnatch one. Yeah, like that it could be something like that, but that's more lived in, or that it could be more of a mix of like a live action element plus a gameplay thing that you do separately that inform one another. Like, Kojima's head can go in all sorts of directions, so I think we're bound to see something really interesting come out of this. But yeah, I'm fingers crossed at least that it's not just some hokey metaverse nonsense, you know?
Yeah, I'm very much hoping for that, I have to say. I do have more faith in Kojima than that, I will also admit, but the fact that this is a cloud game as well was already not something that I massively wanted from Kojima, if I'm honest. But if anyone's going to get me into cloud gaming, it's probably Hideo Kojima, I will say that much.
Yeah.
All right, Lewis, news item number 4. Rocksteady co-founders Sefton Hill and Jamie Walker are leaving the studio. The news was announced by WB Games president David Haddad in a letter on their website, which reads thusly, Lewis.
I have some important news to share with you about Rocksteady Studios. Co-founders and studio heads Sefton Hill and Jamie Walker have made the decision to leave the studio. We're very proud to have worked alongside Jamie and Sefton, who have led their talented teams to create some of the best games in the world. From the critically acclaimed hit Batman Arkham franchise to their evolutionary thinking with Suicide Squad, they've been great leaders of the team. Visiting Rocksteady Studios has always been a highlight for me personally. The attention to detail, the energy of the people, and a sense of what it's like to be in a high-performing studio. They have committed to the highest quality and excellence across all facets of game development while ensuring an outstanding culture of caring for their employees. With Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League nearly finished, they've both decided to leave Rocksteady at the end of 2022 and will begin a new adventure in gaming. We have the utmost respect and gratitude for Jamie and Sefton and wish them all the best in their new endeavour, and like many fans, we look forward to what they do next. Rocksteady is very well positioned with veteran studio leadership being elevated to oversee the team. We're extremely pleased to announce that Nathan Burlow, longtime Rocksteady Director of Production and original founding member of the studio, will step up into the role of Studio Director, and Darius Sadagian will take the reins as Studio Product Director. Nathan and Darius are extremely talented executives and they are passionate about continuing the high quality game development of Rocksteady for Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League and all future games.
And just to add to that briefly, Hill and Walker themselves have also made this joint statement.
Our decision to leave Rocksteady was emotional to say the least. From the day we founded the company in 2004 all the way to today, Rocksteady has been our life and soul. Now with Suicide Squad in safe hands and the team here stronger than ever, it's time to hand over the reins and for us to start a new adventure together in games.
Rocksteady was founded all the way back in 2004 and rose to prominence with the Arkham games, although they haven't released a AAA game since Arkham Knights in 2015, and the only other release in that time is Arkham VR. Lewis, I think that both of those statements weirdly are trying to say Suicide Squad is fine, don't worry about it sort of thing. But I suppose, first question to you, like, do you believe that and do you think it is nearly done as they say that it is?
I imagine it is nearly done, or maybe more accurately, near to release. I still think it's a wee bit out, but like that we're in the final stretch.
Do you think we see it next year?
I think probably, if not next year, then very early the following year. But I guess the caveat I'm putting in here is that what I'm reading into all this might well be tension between the studio leads and the publisher, because we just saw Gotham Knights come out to pretty, well, we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but to pretty terrible fanfare.
It's not been good.
It's not been good, no. And I think, I mean, it's conjecture, but a lot of that might have come from WB, and we can talk about that in a wee minute. But I wouldn't be stunned here if a lot of decisions that are going into making the Suicide Squad game are not necessarily the ones that the people who led on Arkham Knight and Arkham City and the Arkham Asylum series would necessarily be making. And yeah, you're right, like there's a lot here about like, don't worry about Suicide Squad, it's in safe hands, blah blah blah, and they have elevated, you know, long-term studio staff, so I don't think Rocksteady is in any jeopardy or anything like that.
No, certainly not. I think that they are safe. Like, I don't think this is a red flag for the studio necessarily, but yeah, I think that what you're saying on is sort of touching on where I was going to lead with this, which is, WB, frankly, outside of NetherRealm, haven't been making very good games recently,
or any games,
making many games at all recently.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, do you think that is what's pushed this? Because I must admit, that's exactly where my mind went as well.
Yeah, to see, the thing is, if one of them had left, you would be like, well, maybe there's a family thing, maybe there's creative differences, whatever. Two of them leaving and two of them saying they're going off to do something together. You know, you could also say, well, maybe they just want to start again and do an indie game, and that's, you know, a lot of devs do that at a certain point in their career. They kind of break off and start a new challenge, but everything about this makes me think they've just kind of said, well, this has gone too far, enough's enough, and we're going to step out now. We don't want to be here for the launch of this game necessarily. We don't want to be the stewards of the final sequence of development, and that might be an indication that things aren't particularly healthy there. There has been issues, I believe, in the past in Rocksteady around sort of sexual harassment and that kind of thing. There's been accusations. I don't want to say too much because I haven't looked into it again, but I think a couple of years ago...
Yeah, I think those ones were a bit more... I mean, you never want to say this about any sexual harassment. All of them should be taken seriously, of course, but I think that those were a bit less concrete than some of the other ones that we've seen.
I think there had been, a counter argument from other female staff in the studio or something to some of the reporting around it. So, yeah, anyway.
Exactly.
Marky, don't want to get bogged down in the details on that, but just that it doesn't feel like everything at Rocksteady is necessarily the best, and that the two of them stepping away. But maybe that could ultimately be a good thing for the game and for the studio, but it feels more like two people deciding enough's enough to me, totally as an outsider perspective.
Yeah, and again, that's total conjecture, but I completely agree with you. Very interesting to see what these guys do next. Look forward to what I presume will be a new game studio, but headed by the two. Alright, let's finish off as we always do with a couple of shout outs. Speaking of WB games, never guess what we're going to talk about now. Gotham Knights has come out and it's not been good, let's be honest. Currently sitting with 69 on PS5, 66 on PC and 67 on Series X. To say that this is reviewed poorly might be a bit of an understatement. The game doesn't seem to look particularly good, play particularly good, or perform particularly good, as we know from the 30 FPS fiasco. And after delays and this incredibly long dev cycle that we've seen for this game, it's been one of the first AAA games from WB from a long time. This just must be a massive disappointment. Considering all the gameplay that we've seen from this game, I can't imagine that this is an enormous surprise to many people, but for it to get less than 70 on all platforms is pretty poor.
Yeah, a pretty abysmal launch for this game. It doesn't look good. All the reviews are pretty negative about it. I think it's a pretty major flop, really, like you say, from a publisher certainly who's in need of a win, and also it's a bit of a shame for the devs who put out Arkham Origins and people like that, and this just hasn't really lived up to any of that game's credentials.
No, not at all, sadly. Alright, let's shout out number 2. Reviews for Bayonetta 3 have also come out this week, and these are much, much, much more positive. Currently sitting with a very nice 89 on Switch. By all accounts, it is a fast-paced, great action game that has a whole load of fun to play. I don't think it's reinventing the wheel, nor do I think that it has to. More Bayonetta is more than good enough for me, frankly. I think the minor complaints are that it is really pushing the Switch to what the Switch is capable of, and the story is a bit sort of like whatever. But to be honest with you, if you're playing this game for the story, you're probably playing it for the wrong reasons, is what I would say. Overall, looks fantastic, looks like it will be really, really fun to play. Cannot wait to play it, to be honest, Liz.
Yeah, I'm keen to hear your thoughts when you get around to it. I still don't really have much interest in Bayonetta, although my experience with Nier has maybe made me a wee bit more open to it, I would say. Yeah,
it's like Nier, but way more arcadey. That's what I would say. Alright, let's shout out number 3. Some of the media have got their hands on God of War Ragnarok, and so far the reports seem to be very positive, which is incredibly encouraging. We have also got confirmation of the performance options, these being favouring resolution, you'll get 4K and 30 FPS locked, or favouring performance, you'll get 60 FPS locked, and if you have a TV that supports HDMI 2.1, you will get a favoured resolution of 4K 40 FPS locked, and favoured performance targeting 120 FPS, which is pretty much all you can ask for, I think. Lewis, I am ludicrously excited for this game, but because people have got their hands on it, spoilers are out there now, let's just put it that way, so be careful on the old socials, children.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep your eyes out. Don't read anything that you don't want to hear about in advance of this game. I can't wait. I'm pretty much going to black out on it now, I think, because I've not even read a lot of that preview. All I wanted to know from those previews is it kind of bigger and better than the last game, or is it more of the same? And I think we've had a massive thumbs up on that, so I'm ready.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to know that the reviews from this were positive. I didn't want to read any of them. I just wanted to know that they were positive. Alright, listen, final shout out number 4. CDPR have announced that they are remaking the original Witcher game. This happened only a few hours ago, so I don't really know what the reaction to this is yet, but for me, this seems pretty cool. It has been confirmed that this is also the project that they had codenamed Canis Majoris in that recent sort of roadmap that they put out, and it is going to be remade from the ground up in UE5 by a Polish studio called Fool's Theory, who I think had worked on The Witcher before, with full creative supervision from CDPR themselves. The original game released in 2008, and at a time where PC gaming was absolutely dying on its arse before Steam came along and basically single-handedly turned the whole thing around, Lewis. But to this day, that game, so far as I'm aware anyway, is still only available on PC. So this to me is a great candidate for a remake, and I am very interested in this.
Yeah, it is exciting to know that it's coming. Still think it'll be a long ways off. This was a well-received game. It's kicked off this franchise, which has become a massive global sensation. So whatever they want to do with it now in terms of bringing it up to modern-day specs, I mean, this is a game that is ready for a remake. You know, it's a couple of generations old now, so don't hold your breath, but keep an eye out for it coming down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I think that this game was pretty well received back in the day and was probably very underplayed because, again, it just came out at a time where PC gaming was not the thing. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So I think this is a great candidate for a remake. Very excited for this. I hope CDPR can pull it off, unlike the launch of Cyberpunk. Alright, let's think it's time for a beer and then we'll be back for Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is Next Gen Moments. Have we had any yet, Lewis?
Have we indeed, Mark? Yeah, that is the question this week. This is a topic, I suppose, that's been rattling about in my brain, and not like we haven't spoken a bit about it at various points over the last couple of years, but the news about Series S this week and the Gotham Knights news, which I'll touch on in a wee second, has kind of like solidified for me again this discussion about what is the generational leap that we are going through here. Is there a generational leap? Have we experienced it yet? Are we truly living in the next gen future? Or a bit like with the discussion that we were having around the Series S, like what does that leap forward even look like anymore, and can that exist? So yeah, in the 2 years since the announcement of the Series S, this debate has rumbled on about the generations being held back and the inability to kind of really advance. But then a game like Gotham Knights comes out just now and does stick to a fully next-gen release, doesn't have any previous-gen version, and absolutely flops and really fails to deliver even on a graphical and kind of technical perspective, which, as we were talking about earlier,
basic fundamentals has failed on, and certainly the simplest thing, yes.
Certainly on the fundamentals that people are kind of judging the absolute baseline of a generational change, right? So I raise that to say, like, not even being fully next-gen exclusive is actually a marker of a next-gen moment in the way that I guess I'm trying to kind of define it here as being like a moment of change, something different from what we've had before. And so I guess I just wanted to put that question out there. Like, we've had 2 years almost of these generations now. Have we really had a next-gen moment, a game, or even a feature within a game, or a mechanic within a game that has felt like a big leap forward, or something that couldn't have been done before? And I guess just to caveat that before we kick off, like, we have obviously said plenty of times that this generation is kind of evolution and not revolution, but I suppose I'm with a slight devil's advocate hat on, saying, like, have we even had signs of that evolution yet? Are we really beyond what the last generation of consoles could do, other than on a baseline technical level? Your first thoughts on that, I suppose?
Well, on a baseline technical level, I think it is very easy to point to the frame rate stuff immediately and the VRR capabilities and all that, and say that that is an obvious evolution from what was capable on even the pro versions of the last gen consoles. Yes, they could do 4K. No, they could not do anything beyond 30 frames per second. I think that in terms of basic technological advancement, it's very easy to point to that. In terms of true next-gen stuff, because to me that's not really what I'm looking for from a generational leap,
I thought
as we said earlier
you summed it up really well earlier on. Yeah, there has to be more than that, right?
There does have to be more than that, and I think that there should be more than that, frankly. One of the things that jumps to mind immediately that you can point to in a next-gen exclusive game that you can say that right there can't happen on a last-gen console is what we were talking about slightly off air about Ratchet and Clank and how they were doing this flicking between worlds very, very quickly, basically, and that was only possible because of the speed of the SSD and the power of the new console, you know what I mean? And that was how that was possible. And for those that have not played the game, basically you just flick between different worlds in like the blink of an eye, effectively. And like, could that have been achieved in other means, like with different design techniques? Like, possibly. Like, was it this awe-inspiring thing within the game? Like, no, but nonetheless, it is a thing that is possible on new consoles that was not possible on last consoles. Do you know what I mean? And while that is definitely something you can point to, or that I can certainly think to point to, I think you're right. I think that those moments are in reality few and far between. And I think that the reason a lot of these moments are few and far between is that the tail of the last generation of consoles has been so long, and all publishers, not even just the first party ones, have been releasing across last gen consoles and current gen consoles. So outside of making the games look prettier and the load screens don't take as long, do you know what I mean? You're right, there really hasn't been a huge amount to point to yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly where I stand. There's a handful of games that are true next-gen exclusives that, I think you could argue most of them are fine or even good, but haven't really radically changed anything. There's been a bunch of games, I suppose I'm mainly thinking about Halo Infinite when I say this, but games that are sort of seen as next-gen games, or should have been, but maybe kind of failed to deliver on that promise a wee bit. And I would say, honestly,
Halo Infinite wasn't a next-gen game, though. Came out on the previous console.
It did come out in the previous, exactly, but in terms of it was being kind of promoted as a next-gen game in terms of, like, it was launching the Series X, it was part of this next generation of Xbox, but yeah, because it had to run on Xbox One, probably partly because it had to run on Series S, but also I guess in terms of its own ambition, it didn't end up really trying to do more than do Halo in an open world, and it kind of failed at that. And then maybe there's probably good reasons for that around the backwards compatibility and all that kind of stuff, but it didn't deliver anything that you're like, this is the future, right? This is the new thing that this generation of consoles is going to give to us. And I would still say that there are games from the last generation that even on a baseline technical level and animation detail and all that are better than most of what we've had come out as exclusive next-gen games. Specifically thinking really of The Last of Us Part 2 and Red Dead Redemption 2, that I think really set a high bar for how detailed and quality games can be, and I don't think we've seen much yet in this generation that kind of rivals that. But I suppose the next question then would be, like, is that a problem? Because as I said at the start, like, we have said again and again, this is evolution, not revolution, and that technical advancement really has slowed down. You can't really radically alter from where we were generation after generation, because those leaps are different. Not like when we were kids, man. We would be playing PS1 to PS2 games, and every single game that you played at the start of the PS2 generation felt like a generational leap, because it just looked and felt so different. And we just can't have that now.
It was so easy to say then, yeah, because I mean, in terms of like graphics and fidelity and things like that, it was just such a leap from one console to another. And in terms of physical fidelity, like on a console, do you know what I mean? Like how the textures look, how the characters look. Yeah, we're sort of hitting the glass ceiling a little bit there. Do you know what I mean? Like things can only look so good. Although then you see something in the UE5 engine, like that Matrix thing, which just looked absolutely insane. And then we're thinking, oh well, maybe there is more to come. But that's the sort of thing. Like even that can be pushed further. And is it a problem? Like, no, it's not a problem. Like, none of this is a problem. Do you know what I mean? I don't think that's necessarily the right way to frame it. But I think that at some point, game developers are going to want to utilise the power that these consoles have, the hardware that has been put in front of them that they haven't been able to design to before for having to design to the other consoles. You know what I mean? That's sort of the problem that's happening right now, and why I agree with you in our Series S discussion from earlier on, why the thing with the Series S isn't a problem right now, because the vast majority of games are still being developed for the previous gen of consoles. Do you know what I mean? So the lowest common denominator isn't the Series S. It's still the PS4 and the Xbox One. They're the lowest common denominators for the vast majority of games coming out. And for the vast majority of Gotham Knights development cycle, that was also true. Do you know what I mean? They only dropped that very, very, very late on, you know?
Yeah, I guess in a similar vein to that, actually, one of the games that I was thinking, I think a lot of people assumed would be this big generational leap forward, or would feel like it was going to be Cyberpunk, which obviously did release cross-generation and really probably shouldn't have
absolutely
done.
Wasn't a next-gen game. Yeah, absolutely wasn't a next-gen game. And now that they've got it up to scratch on the next-gen consoles, shockingly, people are enjoying it much more. Do you know what I mean?
So it's like, you know, a game like that might well have delivered one of those early sort of bellwether moments. But I think your point actually about the long tail of the last generation, which was a hugely successful and a really creatively and artistically strong period in gaming, the strength and the length of that tail has meant that we are not really making any big jumps forward. To me, the thing... So I guess I'm expecting God of War Ragnarok to offer a bit of a glimpse of the future, even though that is coming out on PS4, because I do think...
Exactly. It's still not an next-gen game.
Because it's not... What I'm thinking, though, is that while it might not be as technically advanced as it may have been if it had ditched the PS4 version, I still think the ambition with Sony Santa Monica must be to tell story in a bigger, better, more interesting way, to level up that combat again from where they were, which was, absolutely at the peak. It was a masterpiece when 2018's game came out. And so if they can improve on all of that, those things, if they've really nailed new animations that make that world and those characters feel even more kind of real and alive, things like that might be the kind of moment where you say, okay, I'm starting to see this. But honestly, I think you mentioned Unreal Engine 5 there, and I wonder if we won't really feel it until games are starting to come out on that sort of engine. And I know a lot of people might listen to this and think, well, that's just about graphics, but it's not, right? Because it's about how that new system will allow development teams to deploy resources differently. So if you can render objects in the game much faster and much cheaper because of the power of this new engine, you can dedicate more resources to shoring up your story or making sure that your game is balanced properly or whatever it might be, I guess that seems like the most obvious leap forward moment, but that could still be ages away, really.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's difficult to speculate on stuff like this because we are not game developers, do you know what I mean? Far smarter people than you and I have to figure out what this generational leap ultimately turns out to be. Do you know what I mean? It is the creative minds, it is these developers and people that are very technologically savvy and know in their minds what can be achieved with the piece of hardware in front of them that can't be right now. As I said, I don't think that these developers have really been allowed to unleash these consoles yet, because, as I said, the vast majority of games have been releasing on the old consoles as well. So apart from doing things like better resolution, VRR support, better frame rates, that's all they can do right now. Do you know what I mean? They can't explore and find out different ways of doing things, different ways of designing games that weren't possible on the previous gen consoles, because those consoles have always had to be considered, apart from in very small use cases. They've always had to be considered. So in terms of what does this leap look like, I don't think anyone knows yet, because they've not been allowed to look into it. They've not been allowed to explore that avenue, you know what I mean? And yes, you point to things like UE5, which is doing amazing things with graphical fidelity and light and ray tracing and how that all comes together and just looks absolutely stunning. Again, I think that is more to come. I think that there's more to come than just games looking way better, games looking nearly photorealistic. I think that there's techniques yet to be developed that are going to blow our minds in video games. Do you know what I mean? I just don't think that anyone has been allowed to explore that enough to do something really exciting with it yet,
Yeah, absolutely that, because I think that is the thing, that the conversation always swirls back around to those kind of graphical improvements. But, while you were talking there, I was thinking, well, right from the top of the show, we were talking about the two Plague Tale games, and one of them is essentially previous gen, and one of them is sort of next gen, although I know it will be out on... In fact, actually, I'm not sure if it is out on the previous generations, but...
What was that, sorry?
Plague Tale Requiem, I'm not sure if it is out on previous generation consoles. But
interesting. I actually don't know that either. I strongly suspect that it is.
I have a feeling that maybe it isn't, but anyway, it's on Series S and all that, so there'll still be holdbacks, and it is a small studio. But just because we were talking about it at the top of the show, I mean, it's one thing that game could look a lot better doing that generational leap, right? But I suppose what I'm driving at here is that I would want to see a Plague Tale Requiem that has real advancements in terms of how it wants to be played, what kinds of scenarios it puts you in, how ambitious they are with animate AI and all that. And again, I'm not really talking about the Plague Tale games here because that's a tiny studio.
Exactly. To be honest with you, I think that's what I'm trying to get at as well. There's things that we can't conceive that are better because they've simply not been done yet. But things like that, exactly, like how we are literally interacting with the game, should change and probably can change, and we've just not been allowed to, or our game devs have not been allowed to explore that in its fullest yet, to be able to provide us with that yet, because they have been having to deal with the last generation for so long. You are absolutely right, by the way. It is out on PS5 and Series X and S only. It's not out on the last generation. Yeah. However, it is also out on Nintendo Switch. So,
maybe that's a streamed version. You don't need to check.
It is a cloud-based version. It's a cloud-based version, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, because that's the thing. We have only had a handful of games that are genuinely only on the new consoles, and and not many of them have made big leaps. It doesn't sound, even from your first 2 hours of A Plague Tale, that it's made any great leap forward. Again, no criticism.
I would not claim
that. No, you wouldn't expect it of this. No, but all I'm saying is that I feel like we're still in a situation where even next-gen exclusives for the next wee while are still going to basically feel like last-gen games in a lot of ways, but just with enhancements, and all the gadgets and bells and whistles that the new consoles can give them, like DualSense support and all that kind of stuff. They'll have that, but until, I just don't think we've even heard promise yet of a game, really. And maybe some people would argue for something like Starfield, but we've not heard promise of a game that is going to feel like something new. Not look like something new, but feel like something new in terms of what we do in the game and how expansive and interesting or deep or challenging that might all become,
Yeah, and I think that is a really good way of putting it, actually. We've not had anything that feels very next gen yet, or maybe we've seen glimpses here and there on some of these exclusives, but nothing that feels truly different. We've seen a lot of things that look different and that run different, do you know what I mean, in terms of like frame rates and resolutions and whatever, but in terms of like the next step forward in video game design with more advanced hardware than devs have ever been able to optimize for before. I basically agree. I basically don't think we've got there yet. And I don't know, like maybe we're just looking at this with sort of, I don't know, the opposite of rose-tinted glasses, because I think that into the PS4 from the PS3, like I reckon it was probably fairly incremental as well. Like, can we point to one defining moment then that went from being, oh well, this feels like a PS3 game to this feels like a PS4 game? Like, probably not. But if you go back and play The Last of Us, the original Last of Us on the PS3, and then you play The Last of Us Part 2, which came out at the end of the PS4, they are vastly different experiences, do you know what I mean? And one feels a generation apart from the other one, I would argue anyway, certainly. And it comes down to more than this one looks better.
Well, absolutely. And obviously,
I think that is down to how the game was designed, because they had better hardware available to them.
And they were deeper into the generation when they would have started that as well, So, and other games in the interim to kind of iterate.
Yeah, of course. This all comes along with learning the hardware and what it's capable of, and how you can use that power, how you can use these SSDs and all that. And I know we seem to be speaking a lot about PlayStation, and we are PlayStation boys at heart, but all of this applies to the Series X as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's even more powerful than the PlayStation. So, it remains to be seen what both of these consoles are capable of, I would say. Definitely.
I think so. I think we were probably about 2 years into the PS4 generation before we really started to see that difference show, and maybe next year, that'll be 2 and a bit years in, is when we will start to see, because there's a huge slate of games coming next year, and some of them are going to be next gen exclusives, and some of them hopefully are going to really push the medium forward.
Well, I totally agree. I think that this is the last of the wave of games that sort of straddle both generations. I think, in my head anyway, it's sort of like God of War Ragnarok is the last one, and then everything after that, everything that's coming out from Xbox next year will be Series X/S exclusive, and everything coming out from PlayStation next year will be a PS5 exclusive. And the minute the first parties start doing that is when the third parties fall in line and do exactly the same thing, So I think that you're probably right in saying it was about 2 years between the PS3 and the PS4 and the 360 and the Xbox One, and I think they were probably relatively in line for that here, maybe a little bit down the line for various reasons. But hopefully next year we can have this conversation again and point to a lot of things that say, yes, this is the jump forward.
That'd be great.
That would. Alright, Liz, I think we'll have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerSToo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really, really, really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure to the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Mundawn, on a shortened month because we took so long to get around to the last play-along game list, but I have now downloaded it. It is installed. I was supposed to play it this week and then never got around to it because it was so busy, but it will be getting done this week, I absolutely promise you.
Yeah, well, we should be talking about the game next week, and for anyone who
Indeed, it will need to be.
Yeah, for anyone who hasn't played or specifically bought it yet, it has just been reduced on the PlayStation at least to £7.79 here in the UK, so there's still time to play it if you want to give it a shot before we talk about it on next week's show. Feels like it's going to be a perfect sort of Halloween spooker to get involved in, so yeah, jump in if you're...
Spooker indeed, wow. Well, I certainly hope that there is still enough time to play it, or else I am stuffed loose. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.